Welcome to Verified RX, your prescription for success. Brought to you by the Vizient Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence.
The 1984 Hatch-Waxman Act codified the 505(b)(2) drug approval pathway and allowed the use of studies from a previously approved drug. To be clear, medications approved via this pathway are not generic molecules of the reference-listed drug. They may have similar clinical effects and roles in therapy, but they also bring challenges. Here with me today to address this issue are Dr. Tyler Wood, System Director of Pharmacy Oncology and Biosimilars, and my fellow Vizient colleague and Pharmacy Executive Director, Carolyn Liptak. I'm Gretchen Brummel with the Vizient Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence and your program host. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Gretchen. It's great to be here.
Tyler, our listeners know Carolyn very well, so tell me about your background.
My name's Tyler Wood. I am the Director for Pharmacy and Oncology and Biosimilars at Providence St. Joseph Health. We are a very large IDN located across 7 states, primarily the West Coast. I personally am based out of Texas, but I oversee the entire Providence enterprise for all things oncology, biosimilars, and many other areas within both clinical and operational pharmacy practice. This topic has an especially large impact in the oncology space and even has some connections to biosimilars. Because of that, it's definitely a topic that's high on my radar. I've been hyper-focused on it, and thanks for allowing me to be part of the discussion today.
Well, appreciate that background. Thank you for that. Carolyn, how is the 505(b)(2) pathway intended to work?
The easiest way to explain the 505(b)(2) pathway is to really look at the 3 types of pathways available through the FDA for new drug applications. The first is the 505(b)(1). This is a new drug application that contains full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness. This is for new drugs, new synthetic compounds, small molecules. We refer to these as the reference listed drugs. Then there's the 505(b)(2) pathway. This is a new drug application with full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness, but where at least some of the information required for approval comes from studies not conducted by the applicant or for the applicant. And then we have the 505(j) pathway. This is an abbreviated new drug application and contains information to show that the product is identical to a previously approved product. It can be active ingredients, dosage form, strength, route of administration, labeling, quality, performance, characteristics, and this is really intended to be used for generics. The differences with the 505(b)(2) product start with the fact that it permits the proposed drug product to be different from the reference listed drug. It's intended to avoid unnecessary duplication of research for the approval of a clinically significant improvement to a previously approved drug. So it's similar in a lot of ways, but not identical. It's also less costly than the 505(b)(1) pathway, and these drugs are distinguished in a way that's not really possible if submitted via the generic pathway.
Well, the background is certainly helpful in understanding the different pathways, and I can see why this might be a favorable choice by some of our manufacturers. Tyler, you had previously mentioned biosimilars. What comparisons can we draw from the biologics approval process?
The biosimilar approval pathway is actually very similar to the 505(b)(2) pathway, except that it's used for biologics. Biosimilars are approved through the 351(k) pathway, which is just like the 505(b)(2) pathway in that it is an abbreviated application and avoids unnecessary duplication of research. The 505(b)(2) applications rely on at least some data related to the reference product, which would have originally been approved via the 505(b)(1) NDA pathway. Similarly, applications for biosimilars rely on at least some of the data related to the originator biologic, which in this case would have been approved via the 351A Biologics License Application, or BLA. Under both pathways, the drugs are similar but not identical to the reference or originator products. One way that I like to think about it is that 505(b)(1) is the equivalent of 351A, and 505(b)(2) is the equivalent of 351K. Now you'll notice I didn't mention 505(j) there. That's because unlike synthetic small molecule drugs, it's virtually impossible to create an exact copy of a biologic, so there aren't any true generics. That means there's no biologics equivalent to the generic approval pathway.
Thank you for that comparison. So what does the FDA say about which pathway to use?
Just staying within the 505 small molecule space, the FDA has said that a 505(j) ANDA is for a drug that is a duplicate of a previously approved product. Under this pathway, developers demonstrate sameness or bioequivalence to the proposed generic drug or a reference-listed drug. On the other hand, 505(b)(2) NDAs can be a new chemical entity or, in their own words, an almost generic I like that term to describe these products. It's an important one to point out. They are almost generics, but just not quite all the way there. Now, the FDA does provide industry guidance for determining which type of application to submit, and you can go to their website and download the full detailed document. But in general, a 505J generic ANDA should be used if the drug product is intended to have the same active ingredient, condition for use, route of administration, dosage form, strength, and labeling as the reference listed drug. Alternatively, a 505B2 NDA should be used if a drug product differs in any of those aspects as compared to the reference drug. And then lastly, the FDA has stated that if a drug or application can be generic, it should be generic, and that they will refuse to file a 505B2 application for a drug that is a duplicate of a listed drug and eligible for approval under the 505J generic pathway.
Carolyn, this process isn't new. What's changed recently to bring on this renewed attention?
The 505B2 pathway is not new. It was encoded in 1984. But in the third quarter of 2022, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services reviewed its approach for establishing HCPCS codes for products approved under the 505B2 pathway. HCPCS codes are billing codes from the Healthcare Common Procedure Coding System, which allow providers and pharmacies to bill for certain drugs in the outpatient prospective payment system. January 1st of 2023, CMS made several coding changes. These drugs are typically originally approved as reference listed drugs, similar to the 505B1 pathway, and they are not given a therapeutic equivalence code by the FDA. As a result, they are considered single source drugs. CMS's program requires that single source drugs have their own HCPCS code, unlike multiple source drugs like generics, who share the same HCPCS codes with the reference listed drugs and any other generics. CMS is also removing brand names from any existing HCPCS codes that were approved before January 1st to allow for this sharing.
We're escalating the complexity here. Simplify it for me. Can a 505B2 product be rated as a generic equivalent?
Well, it can. Until recently, the FDA required applicants who were seeking generic status for 505B2 to file a petition if they wanted a therapeutic equivalence code, like the generics have. In December of 2022, Congress removed this hurdle, and now the FDA is required to determine whether certain drugs are entitled to have a therapeutic equivalence code either during the approval process or within 180 days after approval. Now, this mandatory evaluation is restricted to parenteral, ophthalmic, and otic solutions or suspensions. Keep in mind that unless a product has a therapeutic equivalence rating, it cannot automatically be substituted, and there must be an approved policy in place to review these products internally to determine their place in therapy. We're starting to see a few examples of these 505B2 products who do have a therapeutic equivalence rating and look even more like generics.
So getting to these examples, Tyler, you're seeing things on the front line. How are the CMS changes impacting management now?
We're seeing challenges and opportunities with these 505B2 drugs. For example, just like with true generics, they may provide more affordable options for certain drugs and really help with our financial performance. However, the optics, packaging, wholesaler portals, EHRs, and other systems may not readily or overtly distinguish between the true generics and the 505B2 products. And these drugs have unique billing codes, and if there's a lack of distinction, then there could be a risk on the back end of using a different product or billing code than what was on the prior authorization. This then has the potential for claims to be denied, which could lead to, honestly, some pretty significant financial implications. It's not just pharmacy, it's all teams. We all have to work together collectively to ensure that all stakeholders are on the same page every step of the way, from ordering to authorization, procurement and preparation, all the way to administration and claims reconciliation.
Carolyn, what can our providers do to plan and act to address these issues?
Most importantly, when adding new drugs to the formulary or adding a new NDC to inventory is to identify whether or not the product is approved through the 505B2 pathway. It's not necessarily easy. There's not a list that you can refer to. You can go to the FDA approved drugs webpage by searching the drug name, active ingredient, or application number, and it will be indicated there. And regardless of whether the approval is via the 505B2 pathway or one of the other two pathways, the best way to know which HCPCS code to use for billing is the CMS NDC HCPCS crosswalk for Medicare Part B drugs. You can find the correct code and billing units which drive appropriate reimbursement. You can find this information via the NDC. Since this crosswalk is the source of truth for which HCPCS code to use for which medication, it's important to monitor the quarterly updates that come from the Hospital Outpatient Prospective Payment System updates on the CMS website. And we'll include a link where listeners can sign up for email updates from CMS. The reason this quarterly update is so important is that some 505(b)(2) products not only have a different HCPCS code, but they also have a different number of billing units than the reference listed drugs and other generics. CMS is continuously updating these HCPCS codes, not only for new products, but existing products previously approved. HCPCS codes and billing units can change in any given quarter, even on products you already have on formulary.
Another thing to keep in mind is the regulatory aspect. Compared to the reference product, 505(b)(2) drugs may have similar clinical effects and places in therapy, but because most of them are not rated to be therapeutically equivalent, they can't automatically be substituted in the same way that true generics can. So sites seeking to use 505(b)(2) products may need to take them through P&T committees for approval, develop therapeutic interchange policies, or even incorporate them into collaborative practice agreements outlining procedures for substitution when clinically appropriate. My advice is that sites check with local, state, and federal regulations that govern these processes and what steps are necessary to maintain compliance with those regulations.
Well, it sounds like my initial hope for simplicity is maybe out the window. What are you most concerned about moving forward?
Well, Gretchen, I think most importantly, this is not just a discussion about new drug application pathways. The 505(b)(2) products have a profound impact on therapeutic equivalence, accurate billing and reimbursement, operational processes, and alignment with multiple stakeholders across the organization. Billing is already complex, and this adds another layer of complexity. This 505(b)(2) pathway opens up even more opportunities for coding errors, which can have a profound impact on reimbursement, which no one wants in this time of tight margins.
Looking down the road, what's the landscape going to be like in the next year or 5 years from now? Well, we don't really know yet. It's too soon to tell, but these products definitely have the potential to change certain market dynamics in terms of competition or even payer coverage, much like what we're seeing today with biosimilars. It's the degree of impact. The implications are so widespread, it hits almost every step of the drug process. Successful strategies really need to involve all teams and all caregivers within that process. Everyone needs to be on the same page to find the right solutions for our patient.
Really great insights. You've both provided a lot of rich information. We'll link out to as much of it as we can in the show notes of this episode. I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us today to share your perspectives and expertise. I'm really glad you could be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Gretchen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Please join us for more Verified RX podcasts. Subscribe today, like us, and send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. Verified RX is your prescription for success and is brought to you by the Vizient Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence. I'm Gretchen Brummel. Thanks for listening.